Bastogne, Belgium, December 22, 1944. 7 days before Christmas. A sergeant named Carl Meehan stood over a wooden crate and counted what was left. 10 shells. Not 10 crates, not 10 pallets. 10 shells for one artillery battery, surrounded on all sides by German armor, in snow so deep the mud beneath had frozen solid. The men around him had not eaten a full meal in 3 days. Surgeons 2 miles back had no morphine, no instruments, no supplies. All captured on the first day. An American unit was about to fire its last magazine. This is what Patton did. You have to understand what Bastogne looked like from the inside by December 22nd. The 101st Airborne Division had been encircled for 3 days. In that time, artillery batteries across the perimeter had been rationed to approximately 10 rounds per gun per day. In normal operations, a battery might fire hundreds. 10 was not a battle allocation. 10 was the number you gave men you were asking to bluff with an empty hand. Meehan kept a small notebook. He logged the round count in pencil every morning. The number had been dropping since December 20th, one careful entry at a time, and there was no bottom in sight. He did not show the notebook to anyone who did not need to see it. There was no point in spreading arithmetic like that. Rifle platoons had stopped firing unless they had a confirmed target they could not afford to miss. Lieutenant David Reese, a rifle company commander in his early 20s, had been in wet boots since the first morning of the encirclement. He had ordered his men to walk the ground where the December 19th ambush had hit hardest. They moved through the snow, collecting ammunition from soldiers who no longer needed it. He filed a report on what they found and what they used. It went up the chain. Nobody above him had a useful answer, because there was no useful answer to give. You cannot requisition shells that cannot reach you. You can only count the ones you have left and try not to think about what happens when they are gone. The medical situation was worse than most men on the perimeter knew. The division's entire medical supply had not been delayed. It had not been misrouted. It had been captured. On December 19th, in the opening hours of the encirclement, German forces had taken it. The surgeons inside Bastogne had been operating for 3 days on whatever they could find or improvise. Men who needed morphine were not getting morphine. Men who needed proper instruments were not getting them. The crates were gone. Nobody was pretending otherwise anymore. The doctors kept working. There was nothing else to do. And then, on December 22nd, 4 German officers approached the American lines under a white flag. They carried a formal written demand. The German commander was offering the Americans a way out. "Surrender now," the document said, "or face annihilation." Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe read it. He was the acting commander inside Bastogne, a steady officer who had been holding a shrinking perimeter with shrinking resources since day one. He looked at the paper for a moment. Someone handed him a notepad. He tore a sheet from it, wrote one word, and handed it back. "Nuts." That response was typed up and delivered to the German officers. It became the most famous single-word answer in the American military record of the entire war. It sounded like pure defiance. It was. But you have to understand what it cost to send it. McAuliffe knew exactly what was in those crates. He knew what Meehan had written in his notebook that morning. He knew what Reese's men had been doing in the snow. Nuts was courage. It was also the only card left on the table. You cannot show the enemy your inventory. You show him your nerve and hope the arithmetic never becomes visible. What McAuliffe could not afford was for the Germans to know how close the math was getting. What the men inside Bastogne could not know was what had already happened 60 miles away, 3 days earlier. December 19th, the same morning the encirclement closed around Bastogne, General George Patton received a briefing on what was developing. He did not schedule a response. He did not wait for the situation to stabilize or for someone above him to tell him what to do next. He called his staff together that same day and told them to prepare 3 separate relief plans: north, northeast, direct, 3 roads, 3 options. Have them ready by morning. That same night, before a single order had come down from above, Patton began moving his Third Army. Divisions that had been oriented in one direction began turning north in the dark, in freezing temperatures, on roads that punished every vehicle on them. Corps artillery shifted position. Supply columns were redirected. The machine turned. Not because Eisenhower had authorized it, because Patton had already decided, and he saw no reason to wait for permission to begin something he knew was necessary. On December 19th, the Allied senior commanders gathered at Verdun. Eisenhower chaired it. The crisis was on the table. The question was direct. Eisenhower looked at Patton. "When can you attack?" Patton said 48 hours. The room did not stay quiet. Eisenhower's reaction was visible. Other generals exchanged looks. The skepticism was not polite. It was open. You did not turn an army in 48 hours. You did not pivot an entire corps in winter across icy roads through a front that was actively collapsing in places in 2 days. It was not a credible operational timeline. The men in that room understood logistics at the highest level, and what Patton was describing did not match what logistics said was possible. One of the officers pushed back. It could not be done that fast. The roads alone would prevent it. Patton's answer was short. "It's already started." The room took a moment to absorb that. Patton had not come to Verdun to make a promise. He had come to deliver a status report on a movement already underway. The staff work was finished. The routes had been selected the night before. The divisions were already turning north. What he was offering Eisenhower was not a proposal. It was a timetable for something that could not be stopped, because he had already made it unstoppable. That is the part most people miss when they hear the 48-hour story. They hear arrogance. They hear a general performing certainty for a room full of skeptical men. What actually happened is that Patton had looked at the encirclement on the morning of December 19th, made his decision, and spent the rest of that day ensuring there was no way to reverse it before anyone thought to tell him no. Third Army attacked on December 22nd, 48 hours after Verdun. Exactly as stated. The push north was not clean. The roads were contested. The terrain was frozen solid. And German resistance did not yield ground without making the Americans pay for every yard of it. Every mile cost something. Inside Bastogne, the perimeter held because the men holding it had made a private decision that it would hold, regardless of what the crates contained. Meehan's battery fired carefully, one deliberate round at a time, each shell accounted for in the notebook. Reese's platoon held its section of line through nights cold enough to make the rifles sluggish. McAuliffe ran his headquarters with the composed calm of a man who understood that panic was a luxury that would cost more than any of them had left to spend. December 23rd. The weather broke for one day. The sky cleared enough for aircraft to get through. Supply drops came in over Bastogne, ammunition, medicine, food. It was not enough to end the crisis. It was enough to extend it by another day or two, and another day or two was everything. The round count in Meehan's notebook ticked upward when the drops landed. Then it began falling again. But it had not reached zero. The 4th Armored Division was leading Patton's spear. They drove through German-held ground, through terrain that resisted every mile of forward movement, taking positions the hard way. December 26th. A forward element of the 4th Armored broke through the last German position standing between them and the Bastogne perimeter. They made contact with the 101st Airborne's lines at last light. The encirclement was over. The corridor was narrow. It was not yet fully secure. It was nothing like the clean relief column you might picture. But it was real. And it was there. And when the first vehicles from outside reached the men who had been inside, the arithmetic that had been running since December 19th simply stopped. The count in Meehan's notebook had a final entry that was never reached. The column arrived before the number went to 0. Men who survived those 7 days inside Bastogne remembered the waiting more than the relief. They remembered the rationing. 1 meal a day, 10 shells per gun. The way your thinking narrows when the numbers get small enough. The way a single artillery round stops feeling like a routine action and starts feeling like a choice you cannot take back. They remembered walking snow-covered ground to collect ammunition from men who had been killed because there was no other source. They remembered surgeons working without proper supplies for 7 straight days, without complaint, because complaint was not going to fill the crates. What passed between those men in the years afterward was not strategy. It was arithmetic, the count that kept dropping, the line that kept holding anyway. And the fact, which most of them only learned later, that a general 60 miles away had started moving on the same morning the trap closed around them, before anyone told him to, and had arrived at the exact hour he said he would. The men inside never knew that, while they were waiting. They knew only that the shells were fewer each morning, and the perimeter was still there each night. Does it matter? When you are the one counting the last 10 shells, whether someone is already coming?